Today's guest is Murray-Serter. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's a founder of Heights, one of the fastest growing companies in Europe right now. He's the host of the UK's #1 business podcast, Secret Leaders. He's an active angel investor, having invested in over 50 startups. So super interesting guy. I'm really glad I had a chance to ask him a number of questions. We talked a lot about just time management, performance, how he manages his time and his work. He also shares how he applies business frameworks to his life and to his marriage, how they set objectives and key results together with his wife, which was really interesting. And he also shares the #1 hack that helped him become successful in business, which I thought was really, really cool. Now, if you enjoy the content, please give us a review, leave a comment, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. And if you have any comments, send me a message. You can find me on Twitter, where I also try to share some interesting insights from the podcasts and from other business stuff that I consume and that I learn. Now, enjoy the podcast. All right, today's guest is Dan. Dan, welcome to the Founders Lounge.
Thank you very much for having me, Mattis. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here. So this episode is quite special for me because I've been following your journey for several years now, pretty much from the beginning when I moved over to London, which is about 4 years ago now. And, I've been observing all the things that you're doing, and you've always been an inspiration because you do a lot of different things. And I think you are, in my opinion, probably one of the 3 most interesting people that I know. Interesting in a sense of, it's not like Richard Branson type of interesting, right? Which is on a whole different level, but you do a lot of really cool stuff. So obviously, I'll do a quick intro, okay? And then you can correct me. That's what I usually like to do. I do a quick intro and then I let the guest kind of correct me to see what I got wrong. So obviously your main thing is...
As long as it starts with the cats, then you're doing
no.
it right away.
Okay, so you got it. 2 cats. Important, and they're kind of famous.
Correct.
I know that they were somewhere in the media, so we got that. They're like the fluffiest cats in the UK or something.
Correct.
And then your main thing is Heights. So Heights is, I believe, one of the fastest growing D2C brands in the UK. So we can talk about that. I'm a user, a client, by the way. I got it right over here.
Beautiful customer, good man. Got the sound effects going.
There we go. And then, so besides that, you host one of the UK's top business podcasts, which I'd love to talk about because obviously that's something that I do as well now. Not a top podcast yet, but in that space. You also invest in startups.
Time is a wonderful thing. Yep.
You invest in startups. You invested in some pretty interesting startups. You co-founded a community of founders, which is called Founders. And so that's pretty interesting. What else did I miss? You share very openly on social media in general what you do. I think you tend to be quite vulnerable and quite honest about the things that you do and how you think about stuff. Is that a fair introduction? Is that generally what you do?
Yeah, I think the way that I describe myself is, a creative entrepreneur. I like building stuff. I have my fingers in various pies, I would say. I think I'm not amazing at... I don't know how to describe this. It's hard because I am like 99% of my time's on Heights. So it's like, that's absolutely just where I spend like so much of my time. I mean, every day, that's my job, that's my team, etc. But I have 2 other companies and I'm an angel investor. And so, it's quite hard sometimes to think about it like that. So in theory, I think like just serial entrepreneur, but particularly obsessed and focused with one of them would be a good way of describing it.
This episode is sponsored by freelancer.com, the largest online marketplace for freelancing and crowdsourcing. If you want to delegate some of your work or need to hire an expert to work on virtually anything with any skill, then this is the place for you. They've got over 60 million registered freelancers, so you can find pretty much anyone to do anything you want. Even NASA has been using it for years, and I've been using it recently to get some cool new stuff done for the podcast. So if you want to give it a try, go to freelancer.tflpod.co and you'll get a £30 voucher to start with your first project. So that's freelancer.tflpod.co. I'll put the link in the description. So that's definitely a subject that I would love to talk about because that's something that always fascinates me about people like yourself. some people struggle to do one thing, right? You've got a few other things, but you manage to work on those other things in a very efficient, very effective way. So that's one of the topics that I would love to talk about. Maybe not just yet. Let's do a little bit more of an introduction.
Sure.
I think there's loads of content already out there about, who you are and what you do. But just for those who don't know about your story, can you tell just like a quick summary of, what got you to what you do and to who you are today?
Sure. I've been an entrepreneur for 10 years now. I've done a few companies. My first two were like moderately successful. They had no investors and no employees, so you can barely call them startups. But sort of me and my co-founder dabbling in stuff, and it kind of just went well, and we got out quickly with the money rather than sort of trying to make it a whole massive thing. Didn't know a lot about startups at the time. We then started a company called Grabble together, where we did raise money, we did build a team, we did go for it. We tried to build one of those Silicon Valley type startups, and in the process did very well. Got to #1 shopping app in the UK. We had over 1 million monthly active users. We were growing at 30,000 new users a week. We were just really going for it. And then all came crashing down because we had a terrible business model where we weren't making enough money. And after Brexit, the funding kind of dried up after people were kind of concerned or not sure what to do. And suddenly we needed to have a much more sustainable business than we did have. So we weren't able to sustain that. And I guess the whistle stop tour is, it failed and went through a long process with that. But, during my period of working in a high growth startup like that, trying to understand what we were good at, what we were bad at, one of the experiences that had happened to me was insomnia. So I'd suffered from a few various mental health problems over, the last decade, as people do. My dad passed away. I had depression for a bit. I regularly had anxiety because of funding stress and entrepreneurship in general. Very good bedfellow to anxiety. I had really bad burnout for 3 or 4 weeks during building Grabble, which, to be honest, was my own fault, as burnout always is. But reflecting on the period when I did get burnout, no surprise, very archetypal, OTT, hustle, grind, no sleep, do everything all the time. It was just like textbook stuff. But the worst experience I ever had was insomnia. So I had insomnia for 6 months, meant that I was getting 2 hours of sleep a night. I was getting sleep at midnight, waking up at 2 a.m, wide awake. And it was a really, really tough experience. And I tried everything to solve it, tried lots of different psychological interventions and lots of things to try and get my mind right. And nothing had worked. And in the end, I was out for dinner with a friend who recommended I go see a dietitian, which I've never heard of. I was like, what's that? She's like, it's a nutritionist, but they deal with sick people on the NHS. So I was like, okay, sure. So I did that. And the dietitian immediately just told me, sounds like I have a brain health problem, like mental health, but brain health. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. What do you mean? And she's like, well, if you think about it, your brain is made up of sort of two sides. There's the psychological side and then there's the biological side. And when we think of the psychological side, we think a lot about our mind. So we think about how we think, our mindset, our mental well-being, our friends, our family, our state of mind, all of this kind of stuff. But you've gone to a therapist, you've gone to a sleep therapist, you've done meditation, you're doing all of these things and nothing's working. So that would just lead me on to say that perhaps your actual brain is the problem, in which case we talk about the biological side. These are things like water, like nutrition, like sleep, and like breathing. These are the things that are going to impact your actual physical brain, and they will cause you to have mental health problems if they're not looked at. So I was like, wow, I've never really heard someone talk to me in such basic language, but that all makes loads of sense. I've been obsessing over my mind without thinking much of my brain. She recommended me supplements, which I was very skeptical on because I just wasn't really that kind of guy. And all I can say is, like, to my surprise, she recommended that I, didn't go to. She's very adamant. She's like, you can't go to Holland & Barrett or Boots. You need to get very high quality ones. They need to go to basically Whole Foods or Planet Organic to get premium ones. So I did that, and I within a week was sleeping like a baby. Oh, wait, hold on. My baby's literally just woken up from her naps screaming. Now I don't understand where that saying comes from. What I mean to say is I was sleeping well for the first time in ages. The insomnia was more like sleeping like a baby. So I was very lucky. She told me to go take DHA omega-3, blueberry extract and B vitamin complex very specifically for my condition. And, being desperate and no better opportunity to understand what I should or shouldn't do, I listened, because when you're desperate, you'll do literally anything. And before I knew it, I was feeling a lot better. I was having my first full night's sleep, and that continued. So I became fascinated with this idea of nutrition times mental health. What is that space? What does it look like? How come I, an educated person who's very into well-being and was very aware of how to look after their mental health, I've got lots of mental health stuff in my family. My uncle is a schizophrenic. My grandma died of Alzheimer's. We've always been very open about mental health in my family. How come I, someone so educated, never heard of the idea of nutrition impacting your brain or anything like that? So this just was the spark of what I thought to be, particularly rich territory that fortunately my best friend and co-founder Joel, so interested in, the way that he thinks of problems as well as, strategic opportunities and stuff, which, I have to be passionately motivated by a problem, and he has to be passionately motivated by, is there an interesting challenge to solve here? How do we position this as like a unique and interesting way to solve a problem? But he'd also been over the last year, and he still does, but he'd had really bad gut issues. So it was really interesting because he'd been on his own gut journey, taking Simprove. He also had been to a dietitian, but sort of had gone through this sort of problem, a different problem to me, but he had really bad brain fog and like lots of lethargy all connected to his brain. So it actually wasn't that hard a sell to him, because it's like we'd had very different reasons why. Interestingly, very different reasons why we weren't at, peak mental state is, rich. We weren't even at basic mental state at that point. And yet we'd both gone to dietitians and both been given very different paths, right? One gut, one brain, but it was just very interesting. So for us, it seemed like the sort of perfect springboard to start building a company from. And that is essentially how we started investigating how to build Heights.
Solving your own problem. That's the pattern that I see over and over and over and over again on when I have people on the podcast here. So I would say maybe 60-70% of all the entrepreneurs I have on the podcast, they just go and solve their own problem. And they know exactly what they want to solve, and they know exactly how to communicate it as well, because you're essentially selling it to yourself in a way, right?
Sort of. I was just going to say on the communication thing, I would just say that I guess my disagreement to that statement would be, the benefit of trying to solve your own problem is you'll be very passionate about it. And if you're super passionate about something, you won't suffer as much from shiny new and getting bored and disinterested in your thing, which means you'll be continually on the journey of trying to solve it. So, communication, we always talk about with Heights, we talk about language market fit. And the reason we talk about that is because we understand the product market fit, but actually communicating to consumers why brain care is important is very hard. They just don't care. So, you have to be motivated consistently. Once you've had a problem and it's been solved by a thing, it's very easy. This is the whole banter of vitamin or painkiller. But most people do not go to vitamins as their painkiller. So, trying to find the right language is very hard. And so it helps to be massively passionate and motivated on the long journey for it.
That makes sense, yeah. So you mentioned before, so you talked a little bit about how, nutrition and sleep and how all that is important for you to function, and how often, especially entrepreneurs have, not exclusively, of course, but it's very common for entrepreneurs to have problems with that, because you're stressed and you got a lot of pressure, and there's always so much stuff on your mind. So, and you struggled with that, and now you have a whole business around that. How do you currently think about your work and prioritization and juggling with different things, right? On one side, you've got Heights. It's a fast-growing company. You said that's what you're spending 99% of your time on. But even just within Heights, right? Within a company that's growing so fast, you're constantly pursuing growth while at the same time trying to, everything's on fire, partially because of growth, and you're like battling that, and then you're doing the other things also on the side that we talked about it. How are you currently, how do you think about that, and how do you structure your days, and how do you handle that?
So with Heights, I guess because we've already been through 2 spurts of growth that we couldn't actually handle, it's very hard with the physical, well, it depends what it is, right? But we started Heights, we launched it in the pandemic. So it's been just over 2 years since launch. And we've run out of product twice, which is very stressful if you're a subscription company. And both times were because we had more growth than we were trying to get. So, we had a month of 30% growth, and that's very difficult because you don't have the money to buy the stock. So it's very hard with a physical company, physical supply chain, not like a SaaS, but a subscription. It's very, very tricky getting it right, because also as you're growing, you don't really know what your retention curve is like. So therefore you don't really know how much stock to be ordering per customer, really, because the data is sort of coming at you as and when. Plus all your suppliers all have different terms and different ways that they work. And so it's a very cash hungry business, especially at the start. And managing these things is probably the most complicated thing at all. So, what we've tried to do since is just be really careful at not trying to push past 10% month-on-month growth, because we've basically learned that anything over 10% growth really puts stresses on the business that we could handle, but we don't want to. And I think that's one of the things as well, which is like, what is, like we have this conversation with our team, what is sort of discomfort versus uncomfortable growth? We want some discomfort because that's kind of the opportunity where people grow. Solving challenges, not everything's too easy. Everyone's intellectually challenged. Yeah. We're managing to do great things, and we feel proud. We don't really want the pressures of driving everyone nuts and compromising their mental health, which would be ironic too, on the basis of we had to grow 20% this month because we told VCs we'd do that. We just decided we just don't want to be that kind of business. So we target really at the top end. Again, it's not an exact science. We try to target at the top end 10%. I mean, we did 11.5 last month, and we did 12% the month before. So like I say, you can't force people not to buy, but you can sort of turn down taps and turn up taps as you need to, and try to be a bit more strategic as possible. And actually, at current levels, if we continue 10% month on month growth, we are going to be a £10 million ARR company by the end of January, which will be 3 years from launching. And if we achieve that, that puts us at even faster growth track than Huel, who are one of the fastest growing companies in Europe. So, it's all about what you can sustain. Yeah. But, it's worth saying that obviously compound growth, and compounding 10% is actually a lot, but especially when you're in physical product. So for us, we try to be very careful about our growth, very deliberate. And it's not deliberate in the VC way of deliberate 20 to 30%, burn everything in order to get there. We're no, fuck that. And then on the other side of your question, which is, how do I actually manage my time? That's actually been, interestingly, over the last 2 years in the pandemic, it's been very difficult because there's been so many different things that have also happened in the pandemic that have caused me to shift as often as I can and be flexible. So in reality, I think it's great to have a routine, and I think it's really great to have your habits and your daily week, all set out. Yeah. However, what I've learned I've had to do is decide on my routine and commit to it until there's a big change. And if I need to then replan my routine, I will, based on the new facts and the new things that won't budge. And that's been really important for me, rather than previously I was probably very rigid on, these are the things I need to do in the week, and so therefore these are the ways it's going to work around me. I've become a lot more flexible. And there's sort of been 2 reasons for that. One is I've literally moved house 5 times in the last year and a half. It's been horrific after 10 years in the same place. And the reason for that is I had a baby.
Digital nomad.
House. So, no, not quite. Routine would be hard for a digital nomad, right? Or I guess even more important. But I had a baby and we moved house. I sold my flat. We bought a house. It's a doer-upper. It wasn't ready. Moved into my mum's. Then moved into my mum-in-law's. I'm now in a rented accommodation in Ealing whilst the work gets done on the house. It's all just move. And with 2 cats and with a baby. So, there's been a lot of disruption. If you imagine, I also need complete silence to record a podcast. That's been very stressful, finding the right space to do that. But I made it work. And the way that I made it work was saying, okay, could freak out. But instead, I'm in this new place for a month. This is where I'm going to work. This is where these things are. This is how the week's going to go. These are already my meetings at Heights. They can't change, as in their team meetings, they can't change. So I'll work everything else around those ones. And so, I've tried to just the other thing is when you have a baby, you're your decisions like end up going around that too, right? So you have to change. So actually the biggest interesting change to my whole entire schedule has been the fact that I do bath time and bedtime. So I do the mornings, I do 7 till 9:30, but I also do the evenings, and that's a big shift for me because it means it's 6 p.m., 6:15 actually. I negotiated an extra 15 minutes. But 6:15, I'm getting her in the bath and like ready for bed, and she's usually asleep by 8 p.m. But that's very different for an entrepreneur, especially one who loves working. And if there wasn't that natural cutoff, I would be working through till 8 or 9 by accident. You know, not very intentionally, probably shit work, but having a baby's really helped focus the hours in the day around like, you know, how much time do I have to achieve this? What am I going to achieve? You know, even just an example, like this week she starts nursery. So now I have a new thing to figure out in my schedule. My schedule was all set up. My routine is set up. Now Wednesdays and Thursdays I'm taking her to nursery and I'm bringing her back. So now I'm like, okay, now I know I can't do those morning meetings or those evening meetings. How am I going to work it out? I'll figure it out. But, you know, these things are good examples of me a year ago would stress out a lot about this stuff. And me this year is like just so much more flexible on it because I know I have a bunch of stuff to do. I know what doesn't work for me is just hoping it happens. I have to sit and work out what my new routine is based on with the new information that I have, and then I fit things into my routine.
Interesting. So you mentioned routine a few times. You said routine and having a hard stop basically when you need to finish working, and being flexible for the things that happen between those routine tasks or the routine time slots you have. So when you say routine, and by the way, it's funny because sometimes I feel like a lot of my work is just putting that routine into place sometimes. It's like, okay, this needs to be systemized, that needs to be systemized. I cannot do this ad hoc. That needs to be a block of time on Tuesday morning or whatever. And that gives me then certain stability. So I know that that's going to happen because it's in my calendar, and it gives me stability to then work around that, right? Is that kind of what you have in mind as well? Because you mentioned routine a few times. So is that also like team meetings and, you know, this thing and that thing, and just everything's kind of structured, and then you have blocks of free time in between that where you do ad hoc stuff that comes in?
Yeah, so very specifically, one of the interesting things I've done with my team is, you know, we're fully remote at Heights, so we wanted to figure out a way that we can be working together without like having to disrupt everyone in meetings all the time. We're very values led, so how do we bring values into our remote culture when we're not spending time together because we might be in different teams and stuff? So one thing that we all do is every Monday, Wednesday and Friday we have 3 hours of blocked time, no meetings allowed. And in that period, and they're different hours on different days, and in that period we do 2 hours together, basically silent working. So we all get together on a Zoom. There's a facilitator as one of my colleagues, and he, depending on the day, so today was Monday, so we all did an exercise in the middle. You know, we do 2 sessions basically of 45 minutes, some chit chat around our values and what we've done over the weekend and everything else, and it's like 45 minutes of flow. We're all working together. Someone suggests a playlist and we all work in silence, but just with the Zoom cameras on our own thing. And then we follow up straight after with another session. And before you know it, hey presto, you know, 2 hours are up. You've spent some time with your team, and we very comfortably, I guess it feels like you've done 2 hours of work, but in reality, you have also bonded with the team and stuff. So anyway, those are like my non-negotiables. I have a few other non-negotiables in the week, but I also have a day of no meeting days, where, you know I don't accept any meetings. This is a really good example. This is a Monday. Monday is when I do content. I didn't do it today because I was too busy, but I usually would do, if anything, my personal brand, like writing tweets, LinkedIn, Instagram, any of that stuff. I try to do that Monday on my flow sessions. That 2 hour session, it's like, technically speaking, again, I'm feeling bad because I didn't do any of it today, but technically speaking, that's when I do the personal brand stuff. Then if I'm going to be on a podcast, that's also on a Monday. And then I'm doing my own podcast, Secret Leaders. I do that 4:30 to 6. Those things are all on Monday, so get them all out of the way on Monday. Anything to do with that's done on Monday. Everything else for the rest of the week, depends on like team stuff, of course, but like it kind of works its way around Heights. And then with meetings, they don't start until 9:30. I usually get up at 7. I do a Peloton, I do a walk, I feed my daughter, take her on the walk with me. I either do meetings or listen to a podcast or a book on the walk. So, all of these things are like, happening at exactly the same time. I talk a lot about obviously brain care and, my morning routine. I wake up, I have water, take my smart supplement, I go on my walk, I do a meditation, like, either walking or sitting around there. I've covered so many different things. I've done my exercise because I did a 20 or 30 minute Peloton. I've done so many of these things by night.
Yeah.
And that's, because I'm fitting in, and it's been different at different months of how old my daughter is. But I've been trying to fit it in around her, when she was much smaller. She's almost a year old now. When she was much smaller, I'd have to stick her in a chair right next to me. Maybe she'd cry for a bit and I'd play with her a bit and I would interrupt my Peloton and I'd be like, some days I just couldn't do it because she was going mental and I'm like, right, well, it just didn't work today. That's how it is. Yeah. Then she got a bit older, stick her a little thing that she likes to walk around in because she starts to move and you're like, okay, that's fine. Now she has a little playpen. I put her in that. So it's like trying to work out how I can do these things whilst being on childcare duty and being a responsible parent has even been quite fun. And the answer is it doesn't always work out, of course.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So that's almost like kind of hacking your time a little bit, so you have more time in a day. And that's what I've learned, partially from you, partially from a friend of mine. I think from you, I've seen that you go for a walk and you learn at the same time, and you do like 2 or 3 things at the same time because it's the kind of things that you can do at the same time without making any of those tasks less efficient or less productive or whatever. The other hack that I kind of like is you can hang out with your friends also by just including them into things that you like to do in your life, right? So that's one thing that I've learned from my friend. He loves to go to the gym, so he just invites his friends to go to the gym with him. And he loves, for a while, he was going to do go-karts, and he would just bring his friends to do go-karts. And it's like, well, you do stuff that you want to do anyways, but you include your friends in that. And again, you kind of combine 2 things together. Maybe it's sports. So you do your daily sports or your weekly sports sessions and you hang out with your friends at the same time, or spouse or whatever it might
be. Exactly. Yeah, it's spot on. And that's one of the main things that I've learned is I have lots of things I want to do in a day and everyone always asks how I manage to do them. And I tend to figure out how to combine things. That's the answer. Mm-hmm. And then I reframe things. So, actually for a long period, I was trying to fit in meditation. I was really struggling to, because I had a baby and things were just chaotic and I just was not finding the time to have it. And so I was starting to feel really guilty. So I'm like, shit, I spent years trying to become a meditator. Just when I've got into the habit and kind of giving it up, that's just not good enough. And then I reframed it as well, actually, why do I want to meditate? It's actually so I can be mindful. I have personal OKRs and I do which is objectives and key results, which we use at Heights. Mm-hmm. But then I have personal and relationship OKRs as well. So I write myself out annual OKRs, things I want to achieve. Then I also do relationship OKRs with my wife. So, every Sunday we plan for the week, what we want to do and how we're going to reach our OKRs. Obviously, planning sessions for, how you build relationship OKRs is way, way, way longer. And I've done a whole article on it with a spreadsheet and templates that you can copy and use for free. Yeah. So actually got featured on the official OKR website. If you type in relationship OKRs with a featured story on the official what matters website. So, the reason I'm saying all this is because actually the reason I was meditating is that was my activity for being mindful. So I don't care about meditation, I care about being mindful because it helps me be present, conscious, gratitude, etc. So I reframed it. I'm like, well, what is one thing that I know I do want to do with my child is read a book, story time, do some reading. And I was like, okay, then for the time being, my mindful activity is reading to Margot. And if I meditate as well, that's a bonus point. But if it's not, I'm not going to beat myself up about it. I've only got so much time in the day. That's my mindful activity. So sometimes it's about, for me, stacking activities. And sometimes it's about saying, hey, my life has changed. I'm at this period of my life right now. This is what I've decided is the most important thing. Everything can't be the most important thing. So if the most important thing has changed, how do I reframe that in my mind so I don't walk around with guilt around it as well?
And so I've done this exercise experiment a while ago, and I'm kind of still doing it. When I started, I was tracking every minute of my day, right? So I was tracking what I was doing, and I would just enter that into. In the beginning, I was tracking it in Google spreadsheet. Then I started using Toggle, this time tracking software.
You're actually doing every minute out of interest.
Pretty much. So I try to log it every 15 minutes, and then whatever I was doing,
Wow,
I'd
that's
log it
amazing.
in usually in like
I've
15
done it
minutes
every hour
increments.
for a couple of weeks. It's pain.
it's it's a pain, but you know that I get so much value out of it, or such a hit out of
Hmm.
looking at it at the end of the week, when I'm like, okay, now I understand where my
Totally.
time is actually going, and I can kind of I love
Totally.
tweaking my well, I love tweaking anything, but my time I would say in particular, because I think it's so important where your time is going. And then looking at that and just analyzing and saying, okay, so I spent this much time on this and that much time on that. This is probably too much. I should spend less time on X project and more time on Y project next week. And then seeing, if I actually managed to do it. And that's been life changing. That's been incredibly
Mm.
valuable. I did realize that
Mm.
it's not just about projects, it's about the value of tasks or the impact that you're actually making, right? Because you can spend a
Yep.
lot of time on a certain
Yep.
project, but doing something that's not impactful at all, well, that's probably a waste of time. But it's sometimes I find it quite hard
Totally.
to.
We try to do as much as we can at Heights with that.
Uh-huh.
Hard to do it with your personal stuff.
It's it
Helpful
is.
if you have a group of people around you.
Yeah. It also, I think, just totally depends what kind of person you are, right? I love tracking stuff. I love optimizing stuff. So for me, that's yeah, I gotta get some kind of a hit out of it. Well, for many people, I think it was just like a total. It's a little bit of a weird thing to do, and it's quite hard to stick to it, I suppose. But it's hard sometimes. And one thing that I
Mm.
realize, it's hard sometimes to realize which time or which tasks or which things are really impactful and which things are not as impactful, right? Sometimes you just don't know. It's a new project or it's a new thing that you're doing. It's a new business. It's a new industry that you're in. And I wonder if you have any thoughts around that. Like how do you look at, what's impactful and what do you do with things that are not impactful, but I suppose they have to be done or.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a good question. The honest answer is I haven't done this exercise in ages for myself. I did do it, like I said, I did it for about a month at the start of the pandemic. I was actually surprised the fact that I was actually spending my time where it mattered most, because I really thought I wasn't. And which is why I think it's interesting to continue doing. It's just that at the time, I did it on the basis of I was treating myself as speaking very negatively to myself all the time. And so, doing this exercise was actually quite enlightening to me. So I was like, oh, I'm not a massive waste of space. I am actually doing relevant things. That's good. But, in answer to your question of like, how do I track impact? I probably just don't enough at the moment. And I think this is like another thing, which is, I'm very clear. We do our company OKRs, right? And so when you do them, you spend a lot of time thinking, what are the most impactful, important things that I can do this quarter or this time period? And then we break it down into months. And I think it'd be really important and really valuable thing to do on a personal level. But like I say, actually, the way that I do it is I spend time in December. Yeah, I mean, I do two things. I do quite a lot of this stuff, right? But I do two things in December every year. I do my manifestation guide. So I wrote a manifestation guide after researching tons of this stuff. We do it as a free guide from Heights as well. But there's like a manifestation guide with all of the exercises. Your 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 year, like vision, what you're trying to achieve, how you're working towards it, etc. And there's the whole, overestimate what you can do a year and underestimate what you'll do in 10 years. So I always think it's really interesting to track that. So I've been doing that for the last 3 years. I added personal OKRs on this year so that I can think about, okay, what are my key objectives this year that I'm personally trying to achieve? And then what are my key results? And, they end up being quite like broad and, not that groundbreaking, but I actually was looking over them recently and I was pretty proud to see the progress that I'd made on it. And so that's on one side. And then the other thing is really, if you are in a relationship with someone, I'm married, one of the most important things you can do to like be impactful is make sure that your relationship is as healthy as it possibly can be, because you're spending a lot of time with that person.
Yeah.
A lot of your energy that's not going into your company is going to be going into that person because it's your key relationship. And obviously if you have a child, same. It's a lot. And so, these are, when we talk about like what are my like outputs or where the energy is going, like what I try to do is just make sure that the very little time, broadly speaking, that I do give to things outside of Heights, that they're being given good consideration, that they are as healthy as I might think that they are, that I'm giving the right amount of energy to them. Because if I don't, one day those things could become a massive energy drain. Like your relationship is such an obvious thing, right? But same thing with a co-founder relationship. You kind of don't want that to break up, otherwise it's going to be very distracting for an entire year. Well, it's the same with a marriage, you know. These are things that can give you lots of energy and make you do better, or they can take a lot of energy from you because you neglected it. So, you know, I think I treat my relationship very similar to how I treat my body, which is, again, I'm very into prevention, not cures. I'm very into just trying my best to think ahead of what processes, what habits, what behaviors, what communication would go in to this going well. Yeah. In my relationship at OKRs with my wife, for example, we talk about, you know, what does a good marriage look like is the key question. And so we say, okay, well, we will be spiritually fulfilled, sexually fulfilled, like personally fulfilled, and, you know, healthy. We want a long-lasting, healthy, happy marriage. Cool. What goes into healthy and happy? Let's break healthy and happy down. And that gives us our objectives, right? This gives us like a really clear direction. We agree what those things are together between us. And then you kind of break them down into little behaviors. And then you think, okay, well, cool. Over the course of a month, what are the amount of times, for example, we should have intimacy? Intimacy is not sex. Intimacy is just like, you know, a moment of kindness, like hugging on a sofa, like these little things. It sounds ridiculous, but we track those things. And, you know, some days we do our OKRs at the end of the night, we do them on WhatsApp to each other now. But we just like WhatsApp each other our like daily OKRs, and sometimes we're like, oh shit, no intimacy. You know, it's almost midnight, so good news is we can do that now. But at the same time, it's like it's good just to be aware of this stuff, right? Because before you know it, you know, weeks go by with no intimacy, and you're wondering why you're getting angry at each other, and it's like because you haven't actually tried to be purposeful with this stuff. And I know that people would listen to this and think, that sounds very unromantic, but actually I think what it is very practical and realistic. I think people really overestimate how much the love will flow in a marriage forever. Maybe you're very lucky and that's the case, but for most people, you know, love and caring and kindness are things that you deliberately work on. Doesn't mean that my marriage is perfect, but it means that we have a shared communication style that says we're both going to work on this.
I love it. I'm obsessed with these kind of things, and I have frameworks and spreadsheets for tracking everything. I would say probably not enough for my relationships, and I'm definitely stealing this idea from you. But I think, yeah, it probably sounds unromantic or kind of mechanic to some people, but I think the times that we live in are very fast moving times, and we have there are a lot of things happening, and especially if you're the kind of person like you are, or like I am as well, when you want to do a lot of things, it's just hard to keep track of everything, and it's also very easy to just take things for granted. I think that's perhaps one thing that I'm concerned about even more. You just take things for granted if you don't actually keep track of them, and if you don't say, well, here's what I want and here's what I think is good, and therefore I'm going to track that on a daily or at least weekly basis or regularly in some way, so you can then stay on track and check in and say, oh, actually, I completely forgot about this certain aspect of my life, right? Yep, exactly. So, you know, at the end of the day, it's very easy just to let life pass you by, and to let it all happen to you, and it's normal stuff. There's nothing wrong with this happening. This is literally the default position of what will happen. And I really, really believe that unless you're pretty deliberate in all of these things, that is just accidentally what will happen. And so there's many ways to live a life, and there's nothing wrong with that life either. I'm just saying that for us, you know, we've tried to identify what's important, and that's what I do with my personal OKRs, right? My personal OKRs, I split into business, family, personal. And then I just think about it for myself. I don't do that with my wife. I do that personally. I sit there and I say to myself, okay, what are the things that are important to me? Like what my business does. I mean, technically, not entirely true, right? But technically nothing to do with my wife. So I just sort it out. I just think about that stuff and I plan it the way that's going to make me happy, make me feel like I'm growing, what I'm trying to do in the next year, etc. Personal, again, in theory, because I have nothing to do with my wife, nothing to do with my baby. But family, you know, because personal might be my health, personal might be I'm looking to learn a new skill this year, personal, I want to read X many books, or I want to read less books and do more X. But, you know, and obviously family, that's slightly different because family, you can't force family OKRs if they impact other people. You need to have other people in mind for that. But it was really interesting, like, and I know this is a bit tangential, but, you know, the whole of doing my personal OKR process is what led me to doing pretty much every single bath time with my daughter this year.
was because I thought, okay, what do I want to do? I want to be a great dad. I'm a new dad. I want to be a great dad. Well, what does a great dad do? Well, a great dad is there as much as possible. Okay, cool. Well, I'm doing a remote company, so my excuses are pretty few and far between. Okay, what kind of things are going to come up? Well, I'll be invited to stuff all the time. I'm like, cool. Well, bath time is 6:15 till 8. I can do that every day, and if people invite me to do stuff at 6:15 till 8, then I will know it has to be something pretty special for me to say yes. So maybe once a month I will break that, but I'm talking once a month.
Yeah.
And if it's like important and it's happening regularly, I'll just go after 8. I'll just leave my house at 8 and I'll just do it then. So, I suddenly put a framework in mind, which is like, this is what a great dad would do. So that's what I'm going to do. A great dad would read to their child every day. That's where my reading to my child every day came from, which then led to me being like, okay, and the meditation. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to swap them. Instead of giving myself a hard time, I'm going to just say that that's actually a mindful activity. It was new. I'm going to just do that, and these are things that I've kept up along with a few others, but it took me spending a few hours on my own going through an exercise to sit there and decide what I was going to do this year, and that then becomes my commitments, and then whatever my commitments are that year are sort of my non-negotiables. And as I said earlier, quite often your non-negotiables sound really rigid, but they can already fit in with a lot of things you're doing anyway.
Very cool. It's very relatable, and we drifted a little bit away from business to just like life in general. But I think it's a
little bit.
It's a little bit.
It's how to use a business framework.
Yeah.
In personal life, which I think not enough people do, and I think that's actually a mistake.
That's how I thought about it. I remember the first time when I learned about Lean Startup and business, what is it called? The Canvas thing that was developed, I don't know, 10 years ago or whatever, the business model Canvas and all those frameworks. I was like, when I discovered those things, I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. So we use all these things to manage our businesses, and we have nothing like this to manage our life. And life is, at the end of the day, more important than your business, right? If you don't have your life in control, you're also not going to have your business in control. And that's why I really started thinking about it and applying all sorts of frameworks to life in general, right? Which I think more people should do. And exactly. I think I hope it becomes a more widely thing that people just do in general. Okay, going a little bit back towards business, what would you say? So obviously you've had multiple companies as well as other projects on the side. What would you say that was the most, or what were some of the most impactful things in your entrepreneurial career? Now, that could be either books that really changed how you think about business, could be mentors or events or experiences, something that would you say that's what really shifted my journey or my direction?
So, I'm very lucky because I host a podcast, and with the founders community, which, I'm still very active in, but I don't run. And this is the other thing, right? The other secret to things is you find people to run these things, make it exciting for them, and really learn, which is hard, very hard, but learn how to delegate yourself and then fire yourself. And I've done that in both companies, in both founders and secret leaders. If I was to make a decision, it would be inappropriate, culturally wrong. If I was to say, hey, I want to do this, so we're going to do it, I think it would be a real problem because I've hired people who literally make all the decisions, and culturally I've said that. So in answer to the question, spending time and being able to ask questions. So my view on stuff is you can over-intellectualize everything if you want to, but like 9 times out of 10, someone's done the thing that you're challenged with right now before, and they've solved it pretty well. So the problem is, like, how do you find the people that are willing to spend the time talking to you about those problems? And that is where my podcast came in super handy, right? Like, I was just reaching out to people, hearing their stories, getting to know them, and over a period of time, becoming friends. Now, it's worth saying that before the pandemic, I used to do all of Secret Leaders in a studio face-to-face. You build so much more rapport with someone doing things face-to-face. Since then, I've had to accept that my work is taken off and I don't have time to commit to that and everything else. And so instead, I'm just like hardcore focused. And it sadly means that I'm not actually able to go back to doing face-to-face, which sucks because I'd like to, but I can't do. So in reality, the answer to the question is asking people who have solved problems before and not trying to figure out everything for myself. that's been the biggest 10x by a long way. And with founders, the execution of that community was basically having dinner with people. So it was just spending time face to face with people, listening. That's kind of it. I mean, that's basically been the greatest hack.
I think that's a very good one. I've learned that from a friend as well, and as you said, it's the greatest hack. I think the most difficult part of it is just finding the right people, right? But then you're often surprised how much people are willing to share if you ask. Absolutely. Maybe for me personally, the second biggest challenge was actually having the courage to ask all the questions.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I feel like, is this inappropriate? Am I asking too much? Am I putting them in a weird spot? But I'm still trying to overcome that, right? Asking
people questions and also being willing to accept help. These are actually acts of kindness. They are gifts to people who want to help. Now, not everyone wants to help, so it's not a gift to someone who doesn't want to help, but the good news is most people that don't want to help will just tell you, I'm too busy, or I'm already helping like 100 fucking people, I just have to say no. There's always the tricky thing of like self-preservation, like you can't expect everyone to want to help you all the time. Lots of people, myself especially, already have the commitments. Like I already have lots of people that I'm helping right now. There's no way, literally no way that I could take on any more. And I'm always really clear when new people ask me. That's just until someone doesn't need my help anymore for a period of time. That's like until then I can't take more on. There's lots of people in that situation. But the point is, if you keep on asking, you'll find the right people who do have the space and time and are happy to help. And that is what they want to do. And they are motivated to do it. And in that sense, that's their act of service. And so it's also their act of kindness.
Perseverance, right? It often comes to that as well. You just have to keep going and searching for the right people and asking around. You really do. Just always keep going.
And being willing to take no as an answer. Yeah, being willing to take no as an answer, not getting offended, not taking it personally, which is very hard, like easier said than done. It's very hard not taking stuff personally when people say no. Very, very hard. But important.
Important, yeah. You mentioned the podcast. So let's talk about the podcast a little bit. So you're the host and I suppose the co-founder, you could say, of Secret Leaders, right? Which is the top UK business podcast. That's been going on for, 5 years, 6 years? Something like that, is it?
Yeah, so 5 years. Bootstrapped. The company's called Kindling Media. The podcast is called Secret Leaders. Now a team of 4. Which is great. And where I've got myself into a position, coming back to timing, which is why, I have my cutoff at 4, that's when I do my Secret Leaders interviews. I do my Secret Leaders interviews at 4 o'clock on a Thursday. 4 o'clock on a Monday, every Monday. That wasn't always the case. And there are some guests, of course, that can't do that timing. And so sometimes they have to flex. But usually because we have, we're a certain size and credibility and been going for so long, I usually, and so therefore people are being booked quite far in advance, so it doesn't tend to be so much of a problem. And I got myself into a place with that where, I attend our board meetings, but that's it. And I literally, I said to Will, who does run it, I'm the host, I'll attend board meetings, I'll approve things and I'll give feedback and I'll do the reviews and all of that stuff that we need, but that's it. I don't do any more than that. And that's been a real process over the last couple of years because, I have a lot of opinions. I have a lot of things that I constantly think that we could be doing better or Will could be doing better or all of this kind of stuff, as he knows. And it's good because we have a very direct relationship. And at the end of the day, this is your thing to run. So you got to tell me when I'm overstepping my mark, and I will listen and I will do it. I just don't mean to do it. And, so we have a good relationship where he knows that's true. And I've given him enough experience actually so far to see that I really do mean it. And when I say I do mean it, what I mean is, I've given him enough experience to see that I do intend to get out of the way and shut the fuck up. I just don't act the part all the time. So if he tells me to shut the fuck up, I do.
Okay, so I see. Well, one thing that I see you're pretty good at, it seems like from the, what we talked about now, is really finding the right people to run things, right? That's a key thing. Finding the right people to run things and then just giving them stuff, handing it over to them, and then, as you said, shutting the fuck up and letting them do their thing and letting them make mistakes as well. Yeah,
one of the things on this, Mattis, I would just say is, I was just going to say, one of the things on this that I've learned is the ultimate hack is really just to understand, it's very wanky startup words that is roll your eyesable for sure, but it's just to understand, what are your values? how are you hiring against those values, and how do those values literally translate into actionable things that people can just go to? In my experience, when you get your values right and you hire with your values and you reiterate them all the time in the relationship, whatever the relationship may be, when people ask you a question, you can just go, what do the values make you think you should do? And they go, well, based on this value, this is what I think. Okay, well, me too. It just becomes a very quick framework. So values should take quite a lot of time to figure out. And once you've worked them out, like, you should ideally not do them too much, right? Like, you shouldn't redo them too much.
Well, that seems to be the same for both business relationships as well as personal relationships. I think the more you're aligned with somebody on your values, the more smooth that relationship is, right? And you're just aligned. You just work on things. You don't need to necessarily debate or go back and forth so much or get into disagreements.
Totally.
How did you grow the podcast? So obviously it's, the UK is a big market, and the podcast is in English, making it even bigger market. And it became one of the most successful podcasts out there, right? What do you think? So let's say I'm at the beginning of that journey, right? We got 2 more minutes before I need to wrap up. So what is the most...
Well, I was going to say, this is a hard question to answer in 2 minutes, right? Yeah, it's a hard one for 2 minutes. But so what I'd say is, I did write an article on this, which is really easy to find. You just type in my name, Dan Murray-Serter, and #1 podcast. And I wrote like a how-to guide on absolutely everything, including our growth. Honestly, I think the unfair hack was we were early. I started before anyone else did. The market wasn't that big. You have a good product, people retain. Your product is content. As long as your content is good, people stick around. We got a big audience early, and that made it really like a lot easier. Since then, it's been a lot harder. It's a lot harder to get users, a lot harder to get listeners, a lot harder to keep them. So the best person to answer a question like that in the modern day would be someone who's done it in the last 2 years. It's very similar, the other podcasts that you see that are like the big ones. They either invest heavily in content production, and like those marketing engines are enormous. Or obviously, like, another way is you can be like exceptionally controversial and like play into like trends and make sure that you're really like playing the PR angle. I don't personally recommend either of those things like over anything else. You have to also appreciate that actually in a very busy market, which podcasts are, like, time is the thing that compounds. Quite often you'll just outlast your competitors. Like, most people that start podcasts stop after a few months. Just the natural way of things. Doesn't mean anything other than like they tried and there's better things to do with their time. That's very common. So like, one of the best ways to grow a podcast is to do it for yourself, to have the patience, to want to be doing it because you're doing it for you. And over time, Secretly has been going for 5 years. Yeah. So 5 years, I'm still clocking in every week and doing an episode because I'm enjoying it. And so on that basis, I believe it will continue to grow.
Dan, thank you so much. We're going to wrap up. You got to run. Thanks a lot for your time. It was a pleasure to do this.
My pleasure. And I'm very, very sorry that I did have to run, but thank you so much for having me, Mattis.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the day. I'll see you.
You too, man. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for listening until the end. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like the content, please do me a favor and click the like button on YouTube or give us 5 stars on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. Leave a comment. Subscribe if you want to hear more from us. That really helps also to get the podcast out there, and that helps me get more interesting guests and create even more interesting content. So I really appreciate if you do that. If you have any other comments, questions, feel free to message me. You can find me on Twitter. That's usually the best channel. The link should be somewhere in the description. And check out my Twitter. I try to tweet interesting stuff about similar content that we talk about on the podcast. Key insights from the podcast as well, and just generally stuff that I learn and stuff that I do. So see you. Thanks.